Welcome once again to the Ahern video podcast. Today I want to talk about how to qualify a buyer. Many of you have called me and you said, I've been approached by a buyer, they want to buy my business, or I've had a business broker bring a potential buyer to me and they said they're qualified, but I don't know if they're qualified. Or I've got an investment banker that says, sign on with me and I'll make sure that you're sold. And the saga goes on and on. So the first question, is there a lot of consolidation going on? Yes. But the difference is, are you going to be talking to a capacity buyer or a strategic buyer? And there is a difference. The strategic buyer wants to obtain additional intellectual capital, not just drivers and trucks. A capacity buyer, he just wants the trucks and the drivers and doesn't care about the people. And there is a big difference. Most importantly, how do you qualify a buyer? If a business broker or an investment banker brings someone to you and you haven't heard of them, ask for some financial information on them. And if they tell you it's none of your business, that's the first beware sign. Because even your large companies that are well financed, they're not going to give you their financials, but they'll give you a statement from the bank that says, in effect, that they're a credit-worthy client. There's a lot of window shoppers out there. There's a lot of tire kickers out there. And regardless if you get a non-disclosure sign or not, if they're not a legitimate buyer, they could use some proprietary information against you. So the first thing is seller beware. Make sure that the buyer is qualified. You're certainly allowed to ask them specific questions. Now, assuming that takes place, then test that buyer. If that buyer says, I'm going to call you on a Tuesday, and that buyer doesn't call you, that should send up a warning signal. Now, emergencies do happen. But if this becomes a continual process, then I'd walk away from the deal, even if it's a strategic buyer. I'm often asked to quantify a private equity buyer. And we deal with private equity all the time, but we probably only represent 2 or 3 of them. And the reason is they look at 400 deals a year, 300 to 400 deals a year. In a lot of cases, they don't buy anything or they buy one. The second thing is they say, we're ready to go. And then you send them something, they don't respond. 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 What does that tell you? If you're focused on doing a deal, and you have a deal, or you have a company that they said they're interested in, and they are a strategic buyer, then they should do what they say they're going to do. If they say they're going to follow up on a certain day, they should. We understand there's emergencies. So if they continue to do that process, then that tells you that you're not going to get to where you need to be. So you as a seller have the right to do your due diligence. You as a seller have the right to ask for certain information. Another part of the process is you have to know what information to give a buyer and when to give that information to a buyer. Now, for all of you that watch my podcast or read my newsletter, you know that I'm an analyst. I'm not a business broker. I'm not an investment banker. So we don't get involved in the due diligence process. We don't get involved in the contract negotiations. But we get through the most important part of the process. We look and analyze the business, and we tell you what the market's willing to pay for that business. And if it reaches your expectations, we allow you to interact with our clients. When a seller comes to me, they ask me what I'm going to charge them, and the answer is nothing. If you have something to sell and I think I can introduce you to one of our clients, my clients will pay my fees. On the other hand, we have some clients that come to us, and one in particular was Adrian Carriers, and he said, look, I want to cross the finish line. So what is it going to cost for you to come out here, have one of your auditors, look at our operation, tell us not what we're doing good, but what we should probably focus on before we sell? And we did that, and then fortunately we were able to sell his company, and he got the value that he was looking for. But you see, he wanted to make sure that he had all of his ducks in a row. He wanted to make sure that everything was put into place. I did that for another company called Advantage, and we do that all the time for companies. In other words, you need to know what buyers look for. You need to know what they look for in operations, what they look for in sales and marketing, what they look for in intellectual capital. You want to know what kind of reports they want you to capture. You also need to know what to give them and what not to give them, and how to give it to them and when to give it to them. And those are all of the things that also help you to find a buyer. When a buyer and you sign a non-disclosure agreement and you send some financial information, and if you're a trucking company, you sell equipment list, that buyer should be willing, number one, verify that they received the information, and then no longer than 2 weeks from the time they receive the information, get back to you and tell them there's interest. If they don't, then you're wasting your time. But remember, as you're qualifying a buyer, you have to be properly priced. If your expectations are too high, then it's going to be a very frustrating experience, because you're not going to be able to achieve the goals and objectives you want. And you're going to go through the process, and process is time, and it's frustrating, and it's stressful. So in closing, if there's any words of wisdom I can impart to you, is number one, make sure that you're priced at market or under market values. Number two, make sure that you've done your due diligence on how to qualify a buyer. Three, make sure that whoever you decide to help you through this process, they have a substantial amount of experience in transportation. And four, lead with your heart. You need to be mentally prepared to let go. Until next time, thank you for attending the podcast.